so I'm going to cover chapter 1. I know that you've read chapter 1, you submitted your notes, yeah? And so chapter 1, when you're reading it, can be kind of confusing at first, and that's why I teach you chapter 1, so that way you also have a chance to ask any questions that you have. So, and then at the end of class, we will at least go over the Sampson and Groves article, so that way, because next week, who are my leaders next week? Rational choice and deterrence theory, who's that?
Probably me.
Okay. So, going over that homework assignment is very helpful. So I want to make sure that I get through chapter 1. All right, so refresher. What is theory? Y'all remember? You don't have to give me a fancy definition, but
It's like a way of understanding why things happen.
yes, a way of understanding why things happen. It's a good and very simplistic definition. So your more complex and complete definition is going to be that theory is a set of interconnected statements or propositions that explain how two or more events or factors are related to one another. So your key word being there, explain. We could also even say variables. All right. So that's your fancy definition. Your simplistic is theory is a way of trying to explain things. And if we can explain things, then we can try to understand things. And if we can try to understand things, then what can we do? Help. Help do what? You're right.
Prevent.
Yes, help prevent, and we're in criminology, so help reduce or to prevent crime in the first place. Okay? So that's your refresher. We need to be able to understand our world, and the ultimate goal is to understand so that we can prevent. Make the world a better place. Not just better, safer, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really what Adv Crim is all about, is we're learning how to put theory into application to policy. What can we actually do to make the world a better and safer place? And another thing about theories is that theories suggest the way things are, not the way they ought to be. Okay? Theories, in and of themselves, are not inherently good, they're not inherently bad. In order to determine whether they're any good or not is when you test them. Okay? All right. So, make sense? And just a reminder, drug court staffing meeting tomorrow, so I'll see y'all at bright and early. Beautiful eyes and bushy-eyed tails at 7:45 a.m. at the courthouse. I will also, I'll bring it to the courthouse. I meant to bring it today and I forgot. A statement. I know you all agreed in email that you were okay with it, but some sort of statement saying that you were given the option to say no, and that you chose to say yes, okay? All right, so within theory, that you notice in chapter 1 that they talked about two major branches of theory. You've got theories of crime causation, and then you've got theories of law and criminal justice. Okay, so all right, so theories of crime causation, that's really going to be the majority of this class, okay? So you're looking at micro and macro levels. Y'all remember what micro and macro levels mean? What does it mean?
Micro is like a small group, I guess.
Yes, we're either a micro level or even we're looking at an individual. Why individuals are the way they are, or looking at like small, very small group behavior. And then macro, on the other hand, is the big picture, like societal, what's going on in society, how is society structured. The article from Sampson and Gross, Testing Social Disorganization Theory, that is a macro level theory of crime causation, and they use macro level variables to test their theory. Okay. So this is, like I said, we'll spend most of our time in this course this semester on crime causation theories. But there's also theories of law and criminal justice, which are not really theories of crime causation. They're really trying to explain why are some things defined as illegal, and why are some things defined as legal. So I know you took white collar crime. Did anybody else? Okay. So it's kind of getting at that sort of thing. Okay, so looking at why some things are defined as legal or illegal, who gets to decide. So this is where we're looking at power structures. Who are people in positions of power? And so theories of law and criminal justice are going to be your theories like deterrence theory, your Marxist, your conflict theory. So whoever in here has conflict theory, anybody? Who has that?
Oh, I think.
I know you probably don't have your stuff memorized at this point. And that's at the end of the semester, so.
I have conflict theory.
Yeah, that's Jose and Lupita. Y'all have conflict theory. So, for example, let's see here. Y'all have all learned about the differences in sentencing for crack and cocaine at the federal level, right? That's conflict perspective. The conflict perspective would say, well, if we know that cocaine is more expensive and thus more likely to be sold and bought by people in positions of power with money, they're less, then we have lesser sentences for those people. Because why would you, if you were in the position of power to make a decision or a rule or a law, why in your right mind would you make a law that's against your own interest? Even if it's selfish or wrong or immoral, whatever you call it. Where we know that crack is cheaper and more likely to be used and bought by people who are of poor status, okay? So if you want to keep those people in a position of subordinate status, well, you're going to make the sentencing laws and penalties harsher. Because if you want to stay in a position of power and you want to keep people in a subordinate position, that's what you do. That's what this is all about. Kind of, it's all like the behind the scenes. You can think of theories of crime causation as like the front end, and you can think of theories of law and criminal justice as the back end. What's going on behind the scenes? Okay, why is our criminal justice system designed the way that it is? I covered this in Race and CJ. Lupita, I think I had you in that, was it last year, 2019?
Yes.
Okay. So, there are a lot of people, you probably heard the phrase that people have said the criminal justice system is broken. Have y'all heard that phrase before? Okay. Well, a conflict theorist would say that's not a true statement. They would disagree with it, and they would say the criminal justice system is not broken. It was designed to work exactly as how it was meant to work, which is meaning he positions people in positions of power, and to keep subordinate people in subordinate statuses. Okay, so this is a quick recap for everybody. Who's in our dominant group?
Men.
Okay, got men. Who else? Okay, wealthy, men,
White.
white,
Older.
usually older. Okay, two more. Where are we in Georgia? What do we call it? The Bible Belt? So Christian, and then heterosexual. Those are your dominant categories. Now, let me be clear to everyone, just as a recap, just because you belong to any one of those categories does not mean you have a great life. It just means you have certain advantages in life because of those statuses. Okay. All right, so by default, who are your subordinate groups?
Anyone and everyone who doesn't fit most.
Exactly. So you got women, non-white, poor, LGBTQ, and what was the other one? Oh, any non-Christian. So whether you're Muslim, Jewish, even atheist, Buddhist, anything that's not Christian. All right. So obviously we're not going to get into the whole depth of that right now, but that's just an example of what that's all about. Okay. And we're really trying to overcome those structures that dominant group has put in place. Okay. All right. Now moving on to the next part is looking at causality and determinism. So, in like the hard sciences, have y'all ever taken, biology classes, chemistry or physics, whether high school, college? You know that, X leads to Y, that's causality, right? But here we are in these social sciences. We are not dealing with absolutes, we are dealing with probabilities. You could also say patterns. So I'm sure at some point in your life you've all learned about the theory of relativity. That's not changing. X leads to Y, period. That's not how it works in the social sciences. We could never ever say that if you were abused as a child, you will become an offender. Do you see the problem with that? Because in research, we know that that's not true. We know that based on research and testing of theories and such, we know that while most children who are abused as children do not grow up to become offenders, of all the offenders that exist, what most likely exists in their childhood? Childhood abuse, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological, or been neglected, okay? We're looking at probability. So we know that children who come from abusive homes are at an increased risk of becoming an offender. That doesn't mean they will. So I'm going to write that down as an example. means there's an increased risk from, as compared to children who do not come from abusive homes. It also means that you can come from a perfectly fine childhood and still have a chance of becoming an offender. And that a lot of times can be through other sources like the people that you hang around with, getting with a bad crowd, or maybe some sort of biological issues. So maybe you were born a psychopath, something didn't quite develop right in your brain, your frontal cortex, or in your limbic system. Okay? So we're looking at probabilities and patterns, all right? So you'll see words like increased risk or decreased risk or more likely or less likely. You're not going to see things put in absolutes. Always, will, those sorts of things. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. If it doesn't, please ask. And that is what we call the probabilistic concept of causality. So you saw that in your chapter 1, and we're like, what does that mean? I'm confused. It's okay. So I'm here to teach you. So let me move this podium out of the way. Let's see if I can spell it. Probabilistic. So I'm going to move over to this side of the board, kind of explain a little bit how this works. So in your hard sciences that I just said, like biology, chemistry, physics, once you test something for so long, X always equals Y. Lead to Y. So in the hard sciences, we call it deterministic causality because X determines Y all the time. So in social sciences, we call it probabilistic concept. What is the probability that X may lead to Y? So in research methods, when you learn about independent and dependent variables, okay, which you can shorten and abbreviate to IV, and then you have your dependent variables, or you can shorten to be DV. In this sense, it's dependent variable, not domestic violence. Okay, so in social sciences, you've got a whole list of independent variables that might lead to your dependent variable or variable. So I'm going to use social disorganization as an example since you just read an article on that. You got kind of familiar with some of the concepts, or was a little bit of a refresher. Okay, so in social disorganization theory, you have a number of predictor variables or independent variables, such as high rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty, high rates of female-headed households, so single moms, let's see here, you've got ethnic heterogeneity, or you can simply say diversity, if that's easier for you. means you've got a whole bunch of different ethnicities or cultures living in one space. You've got high population density. Let's see here, high rates of residential mobility. And then physical deterioration. You probably heard it worded as broken windows. Yeah. I say physical deterioration because broken windows is something very specific. It's its own theory, but it's kind of the same thing. All right. So that's a number of variables that social disorganization is like. What is going on in a disorganized community that may lead to high crime rates? So here's the thing is that in your macro level theories, your unit of analysis is always going to be some sort of group. It's never, ever, ever going to be individuals. And I'll explain that more probably towards the end of class. But here, your dependent variable is crime rates. Okay? Crime rates. So you'll notice too something, you'll notice that crime is not under independent variables. Now, in chapter 1, you might have read I think you did read a concept called tautology. Does that sound familiar? Which is circular reasoning. You can't say crime causes crime. That's what tautology is. It's circular reasoning. Okay? So that's why you'll never see crime listed as an independent variable, okay, in social disorganization theory. So we would hypothesize that in community areas that have high rates of unemployment, poverty, female-headed households, the like, all of the above, if that's present, you are likely to see higher crime rates. That would be what we would predict. Hypothesis. And instead of writing all of that out, I'm going to put all the above. Okay? Okay? All of the above refers to all of these independent variables. And we could test all of, we would hypothesize one each at a time. We could go and test each one at a time. And that's essentially what research has found from testing social disorganization theory for at least, 30 some odd years. That these sorts of things do lead, that's an absolute term, are more likely to lead to crime rates. So that's what we mean by probabilistic concept of causality. Okay, so these independent variables may lead to the dependent variables. So when we test theories, the more support we find that X leads to or is related to Y, the more empirical support a theory has. Computer's not in the way. All right. And X in this sense are going to be your independent variables. and y is your dependent variable or dependent variables. Okay. The more empirical support a theory has. Okay. Thus, it becomes more empirically valid. All right. I think I got everything I need to. Something else I want to mention briefly because it's right here. In social sciences, a lot of times we're talking more about correlations than causations. Okay? Run out of space. Okay, so correlation is when something is related to something. So let me give you an example. Age. Let's see, age and juvenile delinquency. Does age cause you to be a criminal? No. But is age related towards a certain risk of being engaged in criminal behavior? The answer is yes. That is a correlation. That we know that juvenile delinquents, or excuse me, juveniles, kids, teenagers specifically, and especially the young group, like from age 17 to 24, we know that that group is at the highest risk of becoming involved in criminal activity. But just because you're 17, that doesn't mean you're going to be a criminal. That's a correlation. Same thing, you do the same thing with race, gender. Being a man doesn't cause you to become a criminal, nor does being a female, nor does your race or ethnicity. Okay, those are correlations. All right. Let's see. There's something. I guess right now is probably a good time I can go ahead and talk about the unit of analysis. I've got this already up here. Let's see. I'm going to erase this middle part here. Man, I don't want to get too excited, but this is too easy to erase. I'm excited. Y'all know some of those boards, like, oh, I have to like break my back. Let's see. Okay. So in conducting research or testing a theory, you always want to make sure that you have the appropriate unit of analysis. Okay? So this is your key term right here, unit of analysis. So if you are testing micro-level theories, your unit of analysis should be individuals. All right, so for example, if we were to study or research or test this differential association theory, which is a learning theory, do y'all remember that at all? It is a type of social learning theory. Okay, and it's a micro level theory, essentially where we say that, that we learn attitudes favorable or unfavorable towards law violation based on the people that we interact with, okay? So we would want to send out a survey to a random sample of individuals and have a whole list of questions asking them about if they've ever been involved in crime, and then you would have a whole set of questions asking about their, where did they learn this from, and you have all this stuff laid out, okay? So you've got to be sure that you have got individuals. Now, when you've got macro level theories, okay, your unit of analysis must be groups. And by groups, it could be things like community areas, communities, nations, or societies, things like that. And I'll give you my own example from my dissertation that I did in graduate school. Oops. All right, so in my dissertation, to get the hell out of graduate school, major research project, I looked at I wanted to understand what community level factors, if any, affect intimate partner homicide rates. So I used a modified approach to general strain theory. It was kind of like a combination of general strain theory and social disorganization theory, if that makes any kind of sense. Because you look at this, is it stressful to be unemployed and in poverty? Yeah. Okay. Is it stressful to raise kids by yourself, whether you're a man or a woman? Yes. Is it stressful to be around people who are very different than you at times? Sure. Okay. It's stressful to be for some people, to be packed in a small place. Okay. All right. So like I said, I wanted to understand what's going on in the community that affected intimate partner homicide rates. So my dependent variable was intimate partner homicide rates. Now my independent variables were practically all of these. So my unit of analysis was not an individual, it was community areas. And the data set that I used secondary analysis as my research method design because people had already collected the data and it was free. And it's a lot quicker to do that than coming up with your own survey, seeing it out, collecting it, you get the idea. So Chicago has been split up into 77 community areas since, I want to say, the 1920s. And the census actually collects data on those 77 community areas, and they collect data on these exact variables, which is super cool. So, does that make sense in terms of if my study is macro level, my unit of analysis has got to be macro level? Okay? Now, in terms of what this is called, if you mix them up and you do the wrong thing, you've got something that's called the ecological fallacy. So an ecological fallacy occurs when you draw conclusions about individuals based only on analyses of group data. cannot do that. You cannot draw conclusions about individuals based on group data. And then there, of course, is the opposite. The opposite is called the exception fallacy. Okay? Where you cannot draw conclusions about group data or communities, regions, societies based on analyses of individuals. Now, the example that I'm going to give you is not necessarily a scientific one per se, but it's really simple to get you to understand. So, some of us may be guilty of this. How many of us have ever made the stereotype that, let's say, I'll use myself as an example. I had my lab partner in high school was Asian. You kind of see where this is going. What do people automatically assume about people who are Asian? Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, that they're super smart, okay? So, because we have experiences with individuals, we are making an assumption that that entire group is really, really smart. You can't do that. If you wanted to determine if that was true or not, you would have to use which unit of analysis? Individuals or groups? Very good. You would have to do groups. Okay, you would have to study groups or aggregates or the entire or a sample of the society to determine, to make that. You can't just draw that assumption or conclusion based on individual level data. Okay. Let's see here. All right, the opposite example is you cannot assume or draw the conclusion that just because someone lives in poverty or they are unemployed, that they are a criminal, right? Make sense? Okay. Unit of analysis is incredibly important. Let's see here. What else? All right, I'll come back to that again. All right, makes sense thus far? Okay, we've got just a few more things. I should have plenty of time. Okay. Any questions? Any questions? So the next question, which your book addresses, is what criteria do we use to judge whether a theory is any good or not? So the first one that your book talked about was empirical validity. That's your number one criteria. So while the rest are not in any kind of rank order, number one is specifically ranked as number one because it is the most important criterion that we use to judge the effectiveness of a theory, if it's any good or not. remember, just as a review, what empirical means. Empirical means that you have used a systematic procedure to come to your conclusions, which essentially means you've used the scientific method and you haven't just used assumptions. We don't use assumptions in sociology or criminology, psychology, whatever. Okay? So, empirical validity refers to the degree to which a theory can be supported or refuted by research evidence. And like I said, I'm going to repeat this again. This is the number one most important criterion. As a reminder, or for those that are learning, there is no such thing as research or theories being proven or disproven. Instead, we find support for or refutation for in the research process. So, if, let's say that, we'll use simple math, let's say that we have 100 studies that test social disorganization theory. And let's say that 70 of those 100, so 70%, have found support for social disorganization theory. Is that a good theory or is it not? The answer is yeah. I'm not trying to trick you. The answer is yes. Because here's the thing, is that depending on which research methods you use and how you conduct your study is going to affect your results. So just because there are, let's say, 30 out of 100 studies that say social disorder is crap, doesn't disqualify or disprove or reduce its empirical validity. It's still a good theory. You're looking at majority support, so you're looking at 51% or more-ish. Okay. Generally, any theories we cover in this class are going to be considered empirically valid. Okay. Empirically invalid theories would be things like Lombroso's atavistic criminal. Y'all remember that you could determine a criminal by looking at like the distance between their eyes or the shape of their lips or the shape of their legs. That's junk. Okay. So that's what we have found. It technically doesn't mean we fully refuted it. We just have a vast majority of evidence to say this is junk. And that's why we don't cover that in this class. It's important to cover it in criminology because it's a history lesson, right? We need to know where our field came from. And here, we already know that. We can move on, okay? So I just want you to understand it. So as you come across articles throughout your semester here, just because your article, say, on general strain theory doesn't find support for it, doesn't mean that we throw general strain theory out the window, okay? It just means that you have one study, at least out there, that says, hey, I don't have a lot of support, okay? Does this make sense? All right, so empirical validity is the most important criterion. The rest are not in any rank order, FYI. Testability. The theories have to be falsifiable. and testable. If they are not testable, they have no scientific value. Essentially, a theory that cannot be tested is philosophy. Philosophy doesn't work with research and data. And it doesn't mean that philosophy is bad. It just means they don't work with research data, per se, like we do in sociology, criminology, and psychology. Okay. Another thing about testability, this is where I want to talk a little bit more about tautology. Okay. A theory may be untestable because of tautology. Which, in simplistic terms, means circular reasoning. Okay. So what this means is you cannot say that the result is the cause. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with social disorganization theory over here. That's why you do not see crime rates in individual variable area. Because you cannot say that the result, crime rates, is the cause. Does that make sense? Tautology can be kind of a hard concept to understand at first. Let's see, another theory that is criticized for being tautological is low self-control theory. They have 6 indicators that, are we doing on time? We're doing okay. This is where I can actually plug it in, pull the screen down for a moment. All right, so in low self-control theory, they've got 6 indicators that suggest that you have low self-control. Impulsivity, short-sightedness, insensitivity, risk-taking, physicality, and nonverbalness. So they test these 6 indicators of low self-control to see if low self-control is a predictor of deviant behavior, and if they have deviant behavior, they have low self-control. You see how that is circular? I'm going to write that down for you. All right, I'm going to write that on the top of here because I want to leave this up just in case I need it. I'm going to abbreviate here. So they tested 6 indicators of low self-control theory to see if low self-control theory is a predictor of deviant behavior. Remember, BX stands for behavior. And if they have deviant behavior, they have low self-control. Okay. So it's like your 6 indicators would be in the independent variable section as well as the dependent variable section. It makes no sense to do that. Okay, it's circular. Now what you can do, you don't need to write any of this down. What you can do is on one you've got low self-control defined, and then you could test low self-control theory by measuring things like ineffective parenting or parental criminality or variables questioning about family size, those sorts of things. So low self-control theory, again, we don't throw it completely out the window. We just make sure that we don't use tautology, that we're not using circular reasoning, because then it becomes untestable. Does this make sense? All right, number 3 is logical consistency. This one is fairly straightforward. Does it make sense? Very easy. And in a sense, it's not as if I would ask you if you understood what it means the first time you read it, but if it's analyzed by experts, does it make sense? And the answer is yes. Then that's part of your one criterion for evaluating if that theory is effective or not. Just FYI, all published known theories that we cover in this class are logically consistent, or we wouldn't bother with them in this course. Number 4 is scope. And so what scope means is how much can a theory explain? What is its scope? Okay. Some have many explanations, some have only a few explanations regarding what causes crime in any given theory. So the range goes from wide to crime specific to narrow. So as an example, Merton's structural strain theory is very narrow because it's only explaining crime by the lower class. Okay. And we do cover Merton's strain theory as well as Agnew's general strain theory. And speaking of Agnew's is very wide. General strain theory, because it's not limited to explaining crime by a lower class. We can explain crime by anybody, any socioeconomic status. So we could use GST to understand things like white collar crimes, where we wouldn't use structural strain theory to explain white collar crimes, because generally, people who are committing white collar crimes are at least middle class or rich and powerful, those sorts of things. Okay. Let's see here. So that's all you really need to understand about scope, is how much can it explain. Number 5 is parsimony. Parsimony refers to is it concise or not, or parsimony means it is concise, and you want it to be concise. Parsimony. I'll put this too, that it is interrelated with scope, because you want to use a few concepts to explain a wide range of things. The more concise, the better. Okay? The more concise or the more parsimonious, the better. Now, I have an example of a non-parsimonious theory. This is one time I do have a handout for you. Do you feel comfortable taking it? Okay, if you don't, that's okay. I can post it on Georgia View. So this is Sampson and Lobb's life course age graded theory. Just FYI, it's a really good theory. It's just not parsimonious. So it has one part where it doesn't meet all the criteria, okay? If you will just, oops, sorry. Take one and pass it down. See how long that is? Compared to, let's say, a very parsimonious theory would be social bonding theory. You've got 4 concepts to explain a whole wide range of crimes. And those 4 concepts are attachment, involvement, commitment, and beliefs. That's 4 things. And it can explain a whole wide range of crimes by any age group, socioeconomic status, whatever. 4 concepts versus, look at this big long list. Now, once you actually learn life course theory, it makes sense. It's just, that's a ton of concepts. This is not parsimonious. Does this help you to understand what that concept means? Okay. All right, number 6. I forgot to put the number. There's 5. Let's see. I can erase this next part. So it's usefulness and policy implications. Okay. They are evaluated in terms of their ability to provide guidelines for effective social and criminal justice policy. where it's going to be helpful and effective. So the whole goal, like we started off at the very beginning, what do we do with what we know? What do we do to lessen crime? That's like our whole purpose of going to drug court tomorrow, right? So if theory X is true, then what do we do to lessen crime? And if theory X is false, what do we do to get rid of it? So for example, next week's topic is deterrence and rational choice theory. I know I covered this in my criminology class, but do you know which theory has the least empirical validity? I already told, I just gave you the answer. The one we're covering next week? Deterrence theory. Deterrence theory actually has the least empirical validity. It's been tested and tested over and over and over, a lot of times. Now, depending on what kind of crime you're looking at, deterrence can be effective in some areas. So for example, when we went to an LAE regional conference in Alabama, we went to Huntsville, and they talked to us about their bicycle unit, which a lot of people at first, kind of chuckle and laugh, like a bicycle unit. Well, before we laugh, maybe you want to work an 8-hour shift on a bicycle and see what you're going to be laughing then, right? But what had happened is they were having a lot of car break-ins, and a lot of car thefts. Okay, so what they did is, okay, well, if you're in a cop car, that's very conspicuous, it's very obvious. But if you're a cop on a bicycle, you can hide. And so once the word got out in the community that they had a bicycle unit, what do you think happened to car thefts and car break-ins? So it depends on the type of crime that you're talking about. Now overall, when you're talking about giving harsh and stiff penalties for things like drugs, the overwhelming research has found it's ineffective. So it really depends on what it is that you're talking about. So again, we don't throw out deterrence and rational choice theory out. We don't throw it out the window. We look at its usefulness in certain areas of what is it we're talking about in crime prevention. Okay? Is this making sense? Okay? So they used evidence of deterrence theory to try to reduce and prevent crime, and it was very effective. But is increasing the police, and this is really, I think this is one of your questions, an article for you to find out, is adding more police to the force going to lessen or decrease domestic violence? Probably not. We'll see what you come up with your article, but probably not, because it's not a visible crime. It's something that happens behind closed doors. Okay? So that's our whole goal in this class, really is number 6. This is our focus the whole way through the semester. What is the theory's usefulness, and what are we going to do with it? How can we make the world a better place? And this is where you're going to have the chance throughout the semester to get really creative with your own ideas, whether they're realistic or not. That's really one of I think the greatest parts of this class. Like last fall, they came up with some really interesting ideas. And that's why we started next week will be this one beautiful little happy family with new ideas and get to know each other and move forward. Additional information, kind of an FYI, you always need to know who your major authors are in each theory. because you need to, one, it's just important, and two, you need to give credit where credit is due. Okay? And then I went over this with you briefly last week. That was part of your homework assignment, is understanding the weaknesses and limitations of theory. So, or of any research that you come across. Okay, because to be clear, no research is perfect, no research is unflawed, there's always flaws, there's always weaknesses, and it's important to understand that. Okay. Let's see here. That's pretty much it. Now, we have a few minutes left, so two things. Do you have any questions over what we covered as of right now? Yes, ma'am.
One not on, it's about the bicycle.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Did they say whether anyone like stole their bicycles?
Oh, they did not. In that case, it's been several years. Because I don't know. Are you talking about like when they were enforcing the law, someone came around and stole? Oh, that part I don't know. They never mentioned it, so I can only maybe assume no, but.
Because that's what, like, that would be really weird if like they're trying to like enforce it and like help it out and everything, and then somebody did just end up stealing.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet at least one jackass did, because, there you go. But that's an interesting question. So my next thing is, I know we're just about out of time, but I would like to go over the homework assignment with you so that you feel comfortable in your semester ahead. So my question now becomes, do you have time to stay to go over it? Or do you have to go to work? Anything else? It shouldn't take us too long. I'm not going to keep you here, forever. But I just want to get to where you can ask me any questions, or I can go over some of the things and maybe clear up any confusions, this is especially important for those who are going next week. Okay? All right. So if you got the answers wrong, don't worry about it. This is a learning process, okay? So the purpose, does anybody want to give me the purpose?
For the first article, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm only going to go over the Sampson and Groves article, just because we don't have time to do both. So what is the purpose of the Sampson and Groves article?
Community social organization and finding out how it results in like the variation of crime and delinquency.
Okay, that's one way to word it. Another way that you could word it is to test social disorganization theory, because it's never been tested before. If you don't have a word exactly like that, don't panic. Nobody's going to have the exact wording that I'm going to have, okay? That's the whole purpose of it. It had never been tested before, and that's what they wanted to do. Pre-existing literature, give me one bullet point that you came up with. I'll have each person give me a bullet point.
One of them was that community involvement and other peer mentors determine what can also happen to children.
Very good. All right, Lupita, another bullet point?
I just put, Shaw and McKay argue that three structural factors led to the destruction of community social organizations.
Very good. Very good. All right, Jose?
I put a part of conference, but I put the hit reach and Rosick conducted a test of ecological implications on social disorganization theory.
Yep, that's good. All right, and Ariel, last but not least?
Previous studies have found that low economic status, ethnic heterogeneity, and residential mobility lead to social disorganization.
Very good. Those are all excellent examples of pre-existing literature. Very good. All right, number 3, the hypotheses. That's where it gets really complex. There were a lot of hypotheses. If you didn't catch them all, don't panic. This is a learning process, okay? So there are actually 8 hypotheses. How many did you come up with? I'm just curious. Don't be shy.
I grabbed one.
Okay, go ahead.
And the other article I grabbed more because it actually stated that.
Right, yeah, and that's the thing, is that you'll notice some articles are very blatant, hypothesis one, and others, it's kind of just
Mixed
mixed in and you kind of have to figure it out for yourself. So, in order to save us time so that you're not here forever, they're kind of broken up into two parts. So the part one are talking about intervening dimensions of social disorganization. So you're looking at the ability of a community to supervise and control teenage peer groups. So for example, it's stated, I'm going to read you the statement and then I'm going to show you what the hypothesis would be out of that. So it says, previous research finds that communities that are unable to control street corner teenage groups will experience higher rates of delinquency than those in which peer groups are held in check through collective social control. Socially disorganized communities with extensive street corner peer groups are also expected to have higher rates of adult crime, especially among younger adults who still have ties to youth gangs. So the key is to find statements of prediction. If you remember always that hypotheses are worded as statements of prediction, that will help, if they're blended in, it will help you to see them better. They'll pop out. So if you think about it, if I read that again, not the whole thing, but one statement, you'll notice that it's worded as a prediction. So, I'll read the last one. Socially disorganized communities with extensive street corner peer groups are also expected, that's a prediction, expected to have higher rates of adult crime, especially among younger adults who still have ties to youth gangs. So, therefore, street corner teenage peer groups will have a positive effect on both crime and delinquency. Now, here's one thing that I also need to explain to you is when you see positive and negative effects. It doesn't mean good or bad. It's talking about directionality. I don't know if directionality is the word, but it is now, right? Let's see here. Let's go ahead and erase this. So positive correlation or relationship is if one variable increases, so does the other one. So variable x, your independent variable. So that's what a positive correlation means, or positive effect. So, let me read that again. Therefore, street corner teenage peer groups will have a positive effect on both crime and delinquency. So what that means is that, in other words, as street corner teenage groups increase, crime rates in the community will increase. Does that make sense? Would it be helpful if I wrote that down? It's in quotes because it's in my words. Hold on. In other words, a street corner. Oops. Teenage group, sorry. I'm going to abbreviate, that's community. said, when it says positive effect, not in that sentence, but in your article, positive doesn't mean good, it just simply means one, if your independent variable increases, so does your dependent variable. Let's see, now when you see negative, it means the opposite. Okay, so as one variable decreases, the other increases, or vice versa. As one variable increases, the other decreases. That is a negative relationship. So it doesn't mean it's bad. We're looking at, it's all about direction. Direction. All right? Let's see here. Hypothesis 2 is local friendship networks will reduce both predatory victimization rates and local crime and delinquency offender rates. So, to save you time, instead of going through each and every hypothesis, what I'm going to do is I will give you this handout after we go over the other questions. I will post it on Georgia View so that way you have it for review when you're working on your articles throughout the semester, okay? So that you can see where you maybe you went wrong or where you went right, where you can improve, those sorts of things. All right, so number 4 was what research methods are used in this study. What did you come up with?
Surveys and observations.
Okay, it would be surveys. Another way that you could put this, which I didn't cover last week, is we would call this a secondary analysis. Secondary analysis means the authors use a pre-existing data set, and they use the British Crime Survey, right? So if you got that wrong, don't worry about it. I forgot to tell you about secondary analysis last week. And the beauty of secondary analysis is that it's usually free and a lot faster to get research done. But when you say surveys, you're not wrong because it is a survey that they used, right? Okay. What is the sample size?
I was kind of confused about this because it looked like it used 2 different sample sizes.
Okay.
In different years.
Yeah, I guess I can see where it might be confusing. Anytime you see a capital N in print, in italics, that means your sample size. So on page 782 under data and methodology,
Yeah.
right there, the N in italicized, 10,905.
Okay.
Yeah. Y'all are learning, so I can understand why the different numbers there might be confusing. Okay. So what they did in terms of one, if we look at number 7, where did the sample come from?
Great Britain.
Okay.
238 ecological areas, or?
Oh.
Okay. The British Crime Survey.
British
But
Oh.
yeah, where did the sample come from? The British Crime Survey, which is a nationwide survey of England and Wales, conducted in 1982 under the auspices of the Research and Planning Unit of the Home Office. Please don't be embarrassed. You're learning, okay? You're learning. I was in your shoes before too. Okay, so that's where the sample came from, the British Crime Survey, which technically is from Great Britain, okay? You've got your sample size, which is 10,905. Is the sample size large enough
Yes.
to be considered valid? Correct, because it is more than 100.
Oh,
It's, you probably came up with 150 because I said Sometimes you'll see people say 50 to 100.
Yeah.
It's okay, that's all right. But hey, it's still more than 150, so you're not wrong. The general rule of thumb is 100. If it's more than 100, it's generalizable and it's valid. Let's see, and who is the study then generalizable to? I think, Jose, you mentioned earlier about the numbers confusing you. You said something about the 238, or maybe that was you, Chandler, 238
238 ecological
areas. Right. Okay, so the results are only generalizable to the 238 ecological areas of Great Britain. You could not extrapolate or generalize those results to the United States, because might we be different than people that live in Great Britain? Yeah. Same thing for people that are living or from France. You get the idea. And so that's who the results are generalizable to. Now, going back to sample size, there are a lot of numbers there. I can understand why that confused you. So a trick is, anytime you see the italicized N, that means your sample size, that right there. That's a little trick, which I didn't teach you last week, but you're learning. So anytime you see that right there, that right there, that right there, little trick. Okay. All right, almost done. And so the next question then becomes, is this a quantitative or qualitative study, or both?
I said quantitative.
You're correct, quantitative. This one can be kind of tricky based on kind of how it's worded. But it is quantitative because the British Crime Survey is numbers only. There are observations involved, but somebody else did those. So this is purely a quantitative study. And in my answers here, I have tips on determining quantitative and qualitative data. So you can read through that as well. And then, let's see, what are the results or findings? Let's see here. So to make things easy, it might be similar to what you have. Their study not only replicates the finding of Shaw and McCabe's research, but it also extends it using the systemic model of community social organization. Another finding is they found that communities characterized by spare friendship networks, unsupervised teenage peer groups, and low organizational participation had disproportionately high rates of crime and delinquency. So the bottom line is essentially they found support for all 8 of their hypotheses. Okay. Didn't have to answer number 10. Now, what about weaknesses, the final question? Limitations or weaknesses. How many were there?
2.
There's 4. Yeah. Yeah, so it's at the very, very end, like I want to say like the very last paragraph there, second to last paragraph, where it starts off, nevertheless, our analysis does not constitute a definitive test of social disorganization theory. Okay? And they explain 4 reasons why that is. So you've got an overarching limitation, and then they go first, second, third, and finally would be 4th. And I have them typed out there for you. So again, you're learning, so please don't be hard on yourself. Don't go and ruminate. Take care of yourself and be proud of the work that you're doing, because this assignment is not easy. Okay? Do you have any questions for me? Okay. So I want to say I appreciate you staying, and I hope that you benefited from going over this assignment. And other than that, you are good to go. I will see y'all in the morning. Do you have any questions about in the morning? Anything like that?
We're just going to meet at the courthouse.
You'll go in and go through security, and if you can either ask them where to go, and they're going to tell you the jury assembly room, or you can stand there and wait for me, or if I'm already there, then I'll wait for you. So we'll be good to go. Yeah.
We can bring like Like a small, like, notepad?
Yes, bring your notepads, like, your notebook is perfectly fine. A little notepad, whatever you'd like, so you can jot down some stuff, for sure.
Can we bring a bag with us?
Oh, yeah, you'll go through security, you'll just put you'll put your purse or bag through a conveyor belt. Make sure you don't have any guns, knives, be sure also pepper spray, sometimes that's got me a couple times. And I don't have to go walk back in the car, just because I forget it's there. So just be sure you don't have any weapons or anything in construed as a weapon. And should be good to go, but yes, you are very welcome to bring your bag or backpack in and whatever you need, okay? I hope y'all are looking forward to not the early part, but the learning part. And, all right, y'all, hope you have a good evening, be safe, I think it's supposed to be storming tonight.